My son and my housemate have been talking for months about how great it would be to go to the theater and see a movie again. I don't share that particular lust, but I understand that they have a whole history of seeing movies together, talking about those movies, analyzing the directorial style, declaiming favorite lines, and then, of course, seeing the movie again. Finally, last week, they went. They went to see Black Widow. They talked about it all week, and then they flew out the door to the theater. It was like a tornado rushing through the house, out to the cars. I went on cleaning the house. I was still cleaning the house when our housemate walked back in later and said, well, it was a bust. Oh, I'm so sorry, I said. No, it was really a bust. They couldn't get the projector to work. We didn't get to see it. Expecting bitter recriminations, I later asked my son about it, and he said, well, it was okay. We got complimentary tickets. No big deal. No big deal. After all that held up? Sometimes, after great absence, after great sacrifice, things are not as wonderful as we imagined they'd be. And this is obviously the case for the Israelites when we come upon them this morning. Exodus, as you well know, can be seen as the most important book in the Hebrew Bible because it contains the story of God's freeing the Israelites from slavery and God's covenant of them, which is the rock on which all Judeo-Christian history and belief is based. It is a liberation story. It is the story of a very oppressed minority who were fast becoming a majority, who broke free unbelievably from their powerful oppressor and became a new nation. These people had been victims of pandemic slavery to Pharaoh for generations and generations. They were descendants of Asiatic people who moved to Egypt to escape famine. Egypt's immigration program was conscription. Conscription from which it was unlikely that they would ever escape. When we find them today, these Asiatic people, who are later known as Israelites, are at the point of mortgaging their children just to survive. At this point, Moses begins his campaign against Pharaoh. This story has been so powerful in the history of the Judeo-Christian world that Benjamin Franklin, you remember him, wanted to use that picture of Moses freeing his people from Pharaoh on the Great Seal of the United States with the motto, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. Now, it is beyond sad irony that Franklin might have seen the founders of this country, many of whom believed in and were supported by chattel slavery, as Moses. But I would have to take that up in another sermon. So when we come upon the people who were becoming Israel, they have emerged from their pandemic and are finding that life isn't all they thought it would be. In fact, they're so disappointed that they start to misremember how things were in Egypt. They were not sitting by flesh pots eating their fill. They were selling their children so as to survive. But they said, it was so good in the bad old days. The people becoming Israel are having trouble, as are we, imagining a new future. They're having trouble seeing how things could be any different than they had been. They cannot see a way forward. They can only look backward. They can't believe that God can or will make anything new happen for them, and can you blame them? Can you blame them for their disappointment, their apprehension, their confusion out there in the wilderness? Because here we are, trying to emerge from so many pandemics, from the coronavirus, from pandemic racism, from ecosystem meltdown, from the disintegration of institutions as sanctuaries of moral and ethical rectitude. Here we are, trying to find safe ground again, but feeling that ground rumble under our feet. Feeling the tectonic plates of the old order shifting and grinding and sending a fire through the volcanoes of protest and conflict and collapse. Where should we look for help? We can't go back to the way it was. We have seen too much, learned too much about how broken we are to pretend that we don't need a radical new way of being. Paul, whose circumstances were often dire, who often found himself amid people in terrible and violent conflict, had this to say about it. Lead a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called, bearing with one another in love. The calling to which we have been called is, of course, life within the body of Jesus. The calling to which we have been called is to allow ourselves to be knit together, not merely with our lookalikes, not merely with our friends, not merely with our political allies, but with everyone. Paul was astonishingly ahead of his times. He says that we must speak the truth in love, and when we all do that, we will grow in every way together into Christ. We will become with Christ one in God. This is that evolutionary concept I've been talking to you about. But how shall we speak the truth in love? How do we find the courage and grit even to speak to our family and friends who don't agree? Because this is what it will take. And we know that deep in our hearts. We know we have to say what we know to be true, and we know we have to try to do it in new ways, and we know what we have to stop doing. Some of you heard with me on Friday night on Zoom that seasonal workers are dying in the hot fields to make $7 an hour. You see in the news what I see, that black and brown people are still being killed by other people without justification. You know what I know, that trans people and LGBTQ people are still struggling for the right to be who they are without hatred, without persecution, and without fear. You drive where I drive. You see how we have pushed Indigenous Americans to the far corners of the country where we can't see them, where we can't be reminded of what was done to them. And how shall we speak the truth in love about the virus, about the need to believe in medical science? How can we love each other and still have this tough debate about how we're going to manage this wild and deadly virus? Live into your gifts, Paul says. You are gifted by the Spirit, each with unique talent and opportunity. You are called to stop being tossed about by people's trickery, he says, by deceitful schemes, by the dark web, by people who have no evidence for their claims. We are called by the Spirit to do the hard work of bringing a new community into being. We are called, as Paul says, because there is one God of all, who is in all and through all. This same God who is in me is in that guy out there who is pointing a gun at innocent black men, or refusing to give workers a day off to get their vaccine, or passing legislation to prevent teachers from teaching the real history of the United States. Somehow, I have to find the God in me who loves these people as tenderly as God loves me. Somehow I have to speak my truth and hear their truth. Somehow I have to find the common ground between us, even though I will never be finished with the conversation because it will take the rest of my life. We are all as close to one another, Paul says, as parts of the body are to each other. We are all so much more alike than we are different. We know that now from science as well as theology. When Jesus says he is the bread of heaven sent so that we may know God, he is saying that if we do, what he did, he will knit us together. After all, Jesus started a movement which lasted thousands of years. Now is the critical time. Now is the opportunity for all of us to choose, as I know I have said before and will undoubtedly say again. We have to choose what we will leave behind and what we will keep. May it be so that as we choose, we remember the love and cherish the gifts we have been given and be for one another true companions.